Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of Move the Needle. I am one of your co-hosts, Lee Grigsby, and my new co-host, Jay Wilcox, is here with us. Hi Jay, how
Hi,
you doing? You good?
hello, Lee. Very good, thank you. Very well over here.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, before we fully introduce Jay and let you guys get to know who he is a bit, I want to talk about why Move the Needle started to begin with. So right now we're in the year 2024, and back in 2020, Move the Needle was started from. Um, I'll just put it this way: when George Floyd was murdered here in the U.S., it was started as um, my way of trying to be part of the solution with what I saw as a lot of racial tension, racial conflicts, and injustices here in the United States. My goal with Move the Needle was to address difficult and challenging conversations, but not just around race, around gender, around classism. So really, Move the Needle is born from trying to educate people about the injustices against marginalized people. And there are many, many different marginalized people aside from race and outside the US. So it's not just here in the US. That is my goal. That was where this came from. And if you've been following Move the Needle since 2020, we started with a different co hosts back then. We've gone through a couple different iterations. Many of you had seen J.R. Ford, who was the second co host when we were doing video episodes. But I'm honored and I'm happy and excited to have my friend and fellow coach Jay Wilcox here with us. So Jay, I kind of turn it over to you. You introduce yourself and let us know kind of your background, where you are in the world, because no, folks, he's not in the U.S.
Where I
and
am in the world. Yes. It's a long way from where
and
you are, that's for sure. Yes.
that's it's probably a good thing. And then just let us know um, what excites you about being able to co-host Move the Needle. Also,
Well, as you said, I am I'm in Spain, located. I'm Barcelona, Spain, although I'm British. Um,
you're already confusing folks watching. Like they're waiting Spanish.
geographically, yeah, they're all over the place now. Yeah. No, but I grew up in the UK and then moved over here sort of mid-20s. So now I've spent half my life living here in Barcelona and in Spain.
Cool.
Um, and so I'm a business English specialist coach. That's where I spend a vast majority of my time. And working within companies, and that's where my coaching career really is directed, along with a lot of personal relationships and working with coaching in the ambit of personal relationships. And
Sure.
working on this, however, with you is something which has always been uh, important to me. The topic of inequality in general, uh, of which racism is a huge part.
Indeed.
But whether the whole thing of inequality, racism, xenophobia, sexism, all of it is just is always been a very influential part of my life, my thoughts, and my value system.
Mhm.
And it comes into my work on a regular basis. Well, in fact, not just regular, it's constant. It's constant.
I
Because
was,
obviously, inside the
yeah,
world of companies, inside the world of relationships,
sure.
interpersonal relationship management, and communication is there. It's an inherent part of everything I'm doing.
Hmm.
So that's and also I love history. I'm a big student and fan of history. So being part of this is right up my street. And actually, more than
Sorry,
just
while
being
I
up
was
my
taking a sip
street.
of water.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
It's actually it gave me a chance to think, because actually there's something that's more than just being important to me. If
Mhm.
through these conversations we can push our own thoughts, our own ideas, our own feelings, and help others see from a different perspective, that's just pure gold.
That is, and thus the name "Move the Needle," right? If we can, we may never fully swing the pendulum all the way to equity and equality, but my goal and having you on the show with me, especially now, the world is so global that, well, that's kind of redundant, but it's not just about individual countries, man. We are all connected in a way that these topics, these hard issues that we've been dealing with for centuries have to be talked about. And in a way, you said it. Um, I'll say it as there was a congressman who passed away a few years back, John Lewis. One of his best sayings, one of his favorite sayings of mine is, yes, you call people out on these things, right? So the racism, sexism, all of it, inequality. But after you call them out, you call them in, because we're we're only as good as we are together for the solution. You
Mm,
can't separate in order to have a solution. That just furthers the divide, that
yeah,
furthers or makes any thinking about division
yeah,
concrete. And
yes,
that's not going to help any of us move forward collectively. So, um,
exactly.
man, I am happy to have you here, co-hosting Move the Needle, because now we get to really involve in a global feel, a global perspective. I can obviously, I'm born, raised here in the United States, so that is my main perspective. But I do like to look at things from a global perspective as well, and you definitely can help bring that perspective. So,
I
man,
hope
thank
so.
you for co-hosting. Um, so
My
shall we
pleasure.
jump? Shall we jump into it?
Let's do it.
All
Yes.
right. So for today's episode, what Jay and I wanted to kind of address is, um, like I said, Move the Needle started in 2020, and now we are in 2024. As you guys know, with the U.S., there's an election cycle every 4 years, a federal election or general election cycle. So where are we now, um, from 2020 compared to, or where are we now compared to 2020? And when I mentioned the murder of George Floyd back in 2020, a lot of the focus was on the police brutality and what that looked like along racial lines, in urban areas here in the United States. But that sparked a global movement, if you will, a global awakening about racial inequality. Um, Before I jump into where we are now, Jay, do you want to, or can you speak to, how that event affected you with George Floyd?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a quite profoundly for various different reasons because I think uh, one of the most shocking and revealing uh, m- effects of that awful incident
Hmm.
was to see how the really these feelings and this tension is really very present in the US, and it's
Hmm.
there. It's so under the surface, and it, when that awful when that incident happened, when George Floyd was essentially murdered by those
Hmm.
by those policemen, which was a terrible incident and deserves some sort of response. I think certainly myself, friends, family, none of us could ever have imagined the size of that response.
Sure.
That really took us by surprise. I mean, it's like, whoa, seeing that made you fully aware of the
Hmm.
racial divisions that are still very present and hurting in the US.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
it, that was curious, and that really brought it home. And I think it's strange because it's always something that I've only been to the US 4 times.
Sure.
One thing that we notice on each of the times we go,
Hmm.
is the division, is the racial
Hmm.
division. And
Wow.
I've arrived in the US each time, and I have felt that there is uh, an invisible divide
Hmm.
between races,
Sure.
and everybody gets on and works, and everyone's trying to make a life for themselves.
Hmm.
But there's a sense that you're white, I'm black, or you're white, I'm Chinese, or you're white, I'm Hispanic,
Sure. Sure.
and you sense that far more than I've ever sensed it in the UK or here in Europe.
Hmm. Hmm. I,
Um,
it, that's interesting to hear your take on that too, because I'm in it, so it's almost like the seeing the forest for the trees. I know how it
mm,
feels to be here. I know how it feels um, growing up in. I won't I won't get into all of the subdivision within different communities, right? But just that overall division you talked about. Um, and I'll mention, like I've mentioned this before on Move the Needle in previous episodes, where until we can come to terms with acknowledging fully how the country was built, we
mm,
can't really we can't really break those walls of division down, right? The country was founded and started for white male landowners to be in power. And
mm,
I don't say
absolutely.
that with um, any anger or with any frustration. That was a design.
It's a historical
That's
fact, nothing more than
yes.
that. Yeah.
That's a historical fact. That's how it was. Now, over the years, there have been things that have changed to diversify the the chance for equity here in the states. Um, but again, on today's show, or this episode, what we're going to talk about is where are we 4 years from 2020, right? So where are we now compared to the those tensions, right? That were very, very evident 4 years ago. So, fortunately, I'll start with the bad and the ugly. Is that all right with you, Jay? I mean, I don't know how else to call it, but
Much better. Much better to start at the bad and the ugly, definitely.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
let's
That
get
way
those out the way first.
we can end on a good note. Um,
Exactly.
so I'll go full screen here. Um, just to start off, there may not be people who are aware of this um, Project 2025. So Project 2025 is a plan that was created by the Heritage Foundation for a takeover of the United States with ultra conservative policies and personnel in different government agencies. All right. And that is in the event that this upcoming election in November, if the Republican Party wins the presidency, then the Heritage Foundation and this playbook, this plan, is already to be put into place. Project 2025 has four main pillars, and I'm being very, very brief with the description, but there is a website. It's very in depth about everything that they want to achieve. Okay, so the first pillar is the policy agenda. Second pillar is this presidential personnel database. The third pillar is the presidential administration academy, and the last pillar, or the fourth pillar, is their actual action plan, this 180-day playbook. So briefly describing them, the pillar one, this includes a book called Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise. This is kind of um, they lay out what policies they want to change that are either currently in place so that they align more with the conservative promise that is described in the book. Pillar two is this presidential personnel database. This is a list of people. The estimated number has been about 50,000. Yes, that's 50 and 30s, 50,000 um, positions that they would like to appoint if the Republicans win the White House. In all of the different government agencies, they have approximately 50,000 people ready to take hold of key positions, um, again, to carry out the policy agendas throughout the different governmental agencies. Okay. The third pillar, the Presidential Administration Academy, this is an actual comprehensive training course, or courses across different careers, so that any individuals who are interested in being part of um, this conservative movement, this ultra conservative movement, they can get the necessary training. They can get ideology, if you will, all the different things that are needed in order to be ready for political appointment or in political office or any appointed office and carry out the policy agendas. And the fourth pillar, as I mentioned earlier, is the 180-day playbook. This is a very comprehensive, concrete, and detailed action plan that, again, if the Conservative Party or the Republican Party wins the federal election here in the US, this plan is already ready to go. This is a detailed play by play action plan on how to get the policies moved, the people in place, all of that. This is already in place. And if you're on social media, the mainstream media has started to pick up on what Project 2025 is, and they've started really um, kind of diving into what it is. I gave a brief description there, but just briefly before we move on, I put that out there because if this Project 2025 is it takes place, what happens with the ultra conservative movement that it's trying to set is that the diversity and any strides in equity, any strides in collaboration, any strides in a diverse personnel gets turned back, gets changed. So yes, your thoughts before we move on.
Yeah, no, because this is maybe this has more sort of airtime in the US, and here in
Mhm.
Britain and in Europe, people really have no idea about this.
Sure,
Apart from those who are probably very vested in US home affairs and politics.
sure.
The the surprising thing for me, when you're introducing those pillars, I'm just thinking, well, it's conservatism. That's fine because here we've got left wing, right wing, we've got conservatism,
Sure.
and that's
Same
fine.
here. We have left wing, right wing, but yeah, go ahead.
But there's so initially when these have been introduced, that is perfectly normal. I would expect nothing else from a government that's going to have a playbook for when they get into power, that they put things in place, their strategy from their
Hmm.
various um, their various
Policies and
manifestos and
appointees.
promises
Yeah.
which they have made during the campaign. It would be
Hmm.
totally normal and comprehensive. However, then what you've just said has taken it one step beyond my normal thinking, because conservative policy
Hmm.
or politics is perfectly in line and align with diversity, equality, and with actually the constant striving forward
Sure.
that is here to actually eliminate as much inequality, not necessarily financial wealth inequality, shall we say,
Right. Right.
but um, because there is across the board a huge push and a raising of awareness, towards the need for eliminating inequalities in all areas and racism, then
Yep.
the conservative ideas would be totally aligned with that. However, when you introduce that idea that those are going to be pulled back, because what you're talking about, as far as from what it feels like to me, is not
Hmm.
simply conservative, but we're going for the far right wing aspect of the
Yes.
spectrum here. I
Yes.
mean, we're you're going so far right wing with in terms of what you've said is
Hmm.
leaving conservatism behind, and it's coming towards more fascist policy.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's why, like, I try to be fair in my description of it, but you are correct. It is far right wing ideology, policies
Hmm.
that even leaves centric conservatives behind. It's
Yes.
it's the type of policies and people that would be put in place that reverts back to what I said earlier. The country was founded for white male landowners to be in power.
Hmm.
It turns the clock backwards for those kinds of things. So that's really what Project 2025 does. Um, so I have more though, because Project 2025 has not been put in place. But I'd like to share some things that have happened, that have been put in place um, currently. Okay. So let's jump into those. Um, SCOTUS, or the Supreme Court of the United States, has made some decisions and rulings over the last few years that have helped set the stage for this potential of Project 2025. Most recently, they ruled that a president could be immune from prosecution if the if those criminal acts are done as official acts while in office.
Hmm.
They've
Yeah.
also made a ruling a few years ago. They overturned the Roe v. Wade decision, basically saying, um, taking women's choices of what they of taking women's choice away about abortion. That is
Yeah.
highly generalizing it, but that's what that decision had to do with. They have also made rules about they blocked a pollution rule that was meant to minimize and do away with smog and pollution. Well, they overturned that decision. They have instituted or said it was okay for a ban on homeless camps. So a lot of urban areas have homeless people, and if they have nowhere else to go, they don't go to shelters and that kind of thing. They end up creating these tented camps in certain public areas. There is now a ban on that where they can be ticketed and arrested for these homeless camps. The Supreme Court, this Chevron deference ruling, this pertains to how government agencies um, could, in detail, or the agency that was overseeing certain policies, if they were citing a company, that the agency did not have to go through a detailed process in order to um, make this company comply with legislation. And now, by ruling that agencies no longer have that power, it widens the door for companies to just do what they want, instead of the agency being able to have power to enforce legislation. It goes through a long court appeals process. I don't have the time to explain it in detail in this episode. Um, and lastly, the Supreme Court also ruled that affirmative action was no longer needed for college admissions. Um, so just briefly, we come back out here on camera real quick. With these type of decisions, it rolls back we talked about the equity and equality for marginalized people. When you're talking about environment, marginalized people typically live in places that are not environmentally friendly due to pollution and waste. That happens. Also, the ruling of Roe versus Wade, taking women's decision away about what they do with their body, and the presidential immunity thing, but banning the homeless camps. These types of decisions take they take a more level playing field and make it more uneven again. They make it harder for marginalized people to try and get the same access to things. That's why I wanted to highlight some of these decisions. Do you have any thoughts on this before I share some more?
Um, I mean, of course, we all see these things happening. We've all heard these various rulings
Yeah.
coming into, being coming out of the U.S. courts, and it's it's mind-boggling, to be frank. I
Or
mean,
speechless, leaves you speechless, doesn't it? Like
it
the
does. I
highest
mean,
court in the
it's
yeah.
peculiar because you know that these courts are full of exceptionally well-versed and highly educated people,
Mm-hmm.
and that they've got a very good sense of um, what's right and wrong. And
Yes.
um, the the peculiar thing is, of course, the first one on the list here about the presidential acts
Mm-hmm.
that began about having immunity from
Mm-hmm.
prosecution. I mean, this has been one of the great big things just recently with the Trump cases, where
Exactly.
he's actually asked them to all be for his cases to be reviewed, and should he therefore, whilst he was a president, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's I mean they're always worrying. I The question obviously is how effective they are, what type of real world effects it has upon American society, because there's a lot of
Sure.
these things which are said, but how they actually transpire into real world acts is sometimes a very
Mm-hmm.
different thing. And I think sometimes it's very difficult for us to get a grasp on that, because instantly
Very true.
most of these they're just on a human level, they're offensive, right? They're just
Mm-hmm.
instantly offensive, and you know they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what's wrong for me as a person in a court of law becomes a very grey area,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know. I don't know how these points you've listed here
Mm-hmm.
are, and looking forward to you telling me how these are supporting the conservative promise. So this is the Project 25. Um, or are these just sort of the inner machinations of a very complicated court process, where in the real world they're very unlikely to be played out in any dangerous or meaningful sense?
Sure. Well, one way that I can say that they support the ultra far right wing conservative movement is by removing things that have been in place for 30, 40, 50 years
Mm.
that have helped access, such as the ruling about the affirmative action for college admissions. That was to help people of color, and not just black, but people of color, to be able to have better access for college admissions. Maybe you couldn't afford it, but um, by having affirmative action, it at least allowed you to a wider pool
Yes,
of
it did.
for college admissions, right? Um,
Yeah.
but oh, go ahead. Do you need to pause?
No,
Oh, yeah.
I just thinking that you're right. You're absolutely right.
Mhm.
In that sense, it is a huge step backwards.
Yes.
It is an absolutely huge step backwards. And what I don't know,
Hmm.
what I don't know is if they are prepared to take such a drastic step by pulling that off the table. Is
Yeah.
there something in its place which
Correct.
hopefully maintains that notion, or is it literally are we literally
That's
back to the
that's
60s?
and that's what has happened so far. Man, can't speak. What has happened is these rulings have taken place, and it allows the colleges or entities, companies to do what they see fit. There's nothing that replaces it that still allows for equity and diversity and access for marginalized people. That's
Right.
the problem.
Yeah.
This may help as we move forward. I'll share some more. So these are other examples of what this ultra conservative movement looks like, things that are already in place. Well, the one article references um, if Trump were to get into office again in November, how he would basically dismantle Washington, D.C. Yes, the city I live in. That's correct. It was by and large built as a city that helped serve the federal government because um, that's kind of what it was. But it is its own city, has its own government. It tends to be more left thinking or more democratic. But this article really goes into depth about um, how there would be oversight committees, and the federal government would then take over the budgeting and all of the processes that the city does in order to align it with far right wing policies and policies and agenda. This article, the Tractor Supply, is a company here in the United States that has equipment and those kind of things for um, farmers and rural areas. Just last year, Tractor Supply was voted as one of the most diverse and best places to work. This year, they have chosen to end their DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any of their programs that support DEI, programs that support the LGBTQ plus community. They've also started ending their carbon reduction programs that affects the environment. This article here shows how they are ending those things because, as they say, they are aligning with their consumers, and they're assuming that their consumers are all part of this far right wing conservative movement. Okay. So those are just two examples of things that are already in place that would just help this project 2025 take effect. This slide here, this is just showing that this talks about 15 major corporations that exist today that got their beginnings, got their start and profit from slavery or slave trade. Now, I highlighted just a few of the 15, but I highlighted this because what my question is, and what I'm not sure about, is if these companies got a start by profiting off of slave trade, how have they progressed through the last 400 or 500 years in order to be more equitable, be more diverse, or provide services that level the playing field for marginalized groups here in the or not just United States. This is global because these are not just United States companies. So that would be my question. How have they evolved and changed? And to my knowledge, most of them still have white men in power as CEO.
Yeah.
So, what would their vision be like for equity, for diversity, for you know um, supporting marginalized groups for better access to things? That's my question with these companies. Um, Anything you'd like to share before I share some more bad
Um,
and ugly?
bad and ugly. Yeah, there's a lot of bad and ugly.
I promise we do have good things. I promise we do have good things.
It is, but obviously, rather like the depressing news that you shared on the previous company with Tractor Supply,
Mhm.
the the fact is that, and in the interest of profit and money, there's very little there's very little real sincere care shown in terms of being morally better. There's
Yeah.
in terms of a moral compass, it can go spinning around
And,
forever. They don't care. They just go
well,
where the money is. I
and
mean,
well, Jay, what really shocked me about the Tractor Supply example, it again, I just last year, I wish I had put more details about Tractor Supply in the slides. In 2023, if you are a company that is voted nationally as one of the, if not the most diverse place to work, you have
yeah,
continued to support LGBTQ plus community and initiatives. Um, Again, your carbon emissions have been you've been working on reducing those to protect the environment. I'm not sure how you make a pivot so fast to go away from those things in 6 months, other other than giving into who you think your customer base is. Okay. But hold that thought because I see you got one. Hold that thought because let me show you. Um, we can get into a little bit of good, a little bit of good. Okay. So, companies and organizations and individuals that are actually pushing back against this far right conservative movement. Okay. The extremist, if you will. The American Civil Liberties Union plans to not only fight the Supreme Court with a lot of the rulings that they have made, but they're also prepared to legally fight Project 2025 if that comes about.
yeah,
The National Black Farmers Association is definitely pushing back against the Tractor Supply, not only because they have their constituents as well, but and I should have put the statistics up there, but you know, from hearing it, you would think that all of Tractor Supply's consumers might be white, right? Or they might be white men. But there's the statistics. There's another article that I should have shared that shows that even in places like Minnesota, in Wisconsin, a lot of the farmers are black and people of color, and they directly deal with Tractor Supply. So I'm not sure what statistics Tractor Supply was using to move its consumer base to this far right wing conservative movement. This individual, the two individuals I have listed here, Laura Windsor, she is a journalist that there might be some ethical things here that one would question, but she has um, posed as a conservative journalist and gone to dinner and different events with some of the Supreme Court justices and other high-ranking Republican officials and recorded their conversations. So then, recording the conversations, she'd released a few with some of the Supreme Court judges about what they were saying. And in her defense, she said, well, the people need to know this. Like, the reason I'm doing it is because there's more behind the scenes than what people know. That might be there's some ethical things going on there, but she is an individual who is doing what she feels is right. And then also, this individual, David M. Perry, is a white male who, in this article, in his opinion, he also pointed out the statistics about the people of color who are farmers who go to Tractor Supply, but also gave his opinion about how that was just completely wrong with what Tractor Supply is doing. So, contrary to popular belief, or even what you might be hearing here, there are people, especially with even Tractor Supply, fighting against what is going on. You know?
Absolutely. But as with all these things, somewhere there has to be gain. And, you know,
Yeah,
they obtained, like you said, they obtained a really wonderful accolade in 2023, and that was a wonderful recognition they received.
100%. Yeah,
Clearly didn't mean a great deal to them, if they're prepared to
to pivot that
abandon that
quickly.
route so quickly, such
Yeah,
turnaround. Um, there has to be gain. It's all it's that eternal question of what's in it for them, and
sure,
that's what would be
sure.
really interesting to know because
Well,
uh,
I also think they, and I'm this is purely opinion and conjecture from what I've read, but I would imagine they think the election in November is going to be won by the Republican Party, whoever the nominee
mhm,
is, and I think they are expecting this ultra conservative wave to take over the country. So maybe they're trying to position themselves for that. Whether that's right or wrong, whether you agree with it, not
mm,
what I'm trying to say, but I think that's their frame of thinking with it, you know?
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
One thing though that there's the very strong sense that is coming through here as well,
Hmm.
that I'm hearing, which is something that we don't, as consumers, as business people and companies, etc., over here in Europe, uh, you can have a political, you whatever you, whether it's personal or whether your
Sure.
company might even have a political persuasion.
Sure.
You may even, depending on the size of the company, you may even contribute to political parties on a financial
Hmm.
level. Nonetheless, this sense that you might need to align yourself in order to align yourself better with the political ideology so that you're more in touch with your consumer base. It's just anathema. I mean, it doesn't happen. It doesn't They don't feel that. Where does
It
that come from? It's
it's strange
bizarre.
to hear that, doesn't isn't it? Even when I read the article. Now, let me put the link back up because I want people to. I went forward a little bit, but I want people to understand. Yes, like look at these links, copy them, read them yourself. This is public information.
Mm,
I'm not making this up. I'm not. They're not just pulling this out of thin air. This is actually what they're doing. This is what they've done. Um, but before, let's move on real quick because I also want to point out it's not just here in the U.S. that there's good, bad, and ugly going on. As we were talking pre-show, there is conflict, and I'm using these terms loosely, but there's conflict, war in the Ukraine. There is conflict and war, or as we both put it, an invasion in Gaza. There is conflict and war in Sudan, and there's potential conflict and war happening in Taiwan. Um, so I just didn't want people to think that you know the sky is falling here in the U.S. There, there are things happening around the world that we need to pay attention to that also deal with inequity, injustice, marginalized people. You know, um, is there any thoughts that you wanted to share before we take a break and then come back and talk about the good?
mm. Well, the one there is. I mean, obviously, we've talked about the company. This case in the US, much as I find fascinating. I
Sure,
find it also disturbing the idea that people will switch and change company allegiances depending on the knowledge of whether the company is Republican or Democrat. Seems peculiar
sure.
to me, but if that happens, then each to their own. The other thing there is in terms of the conflict. Um, I There's been so much talk over the last 7 months and 8
Hmm.
months now in terms of the Gaza. invasion, and
Sure.
the this interested me a lot in terms of the question about racism, because there's a lot of sensitivity around the subject for
Hmm.
obvious reasons.
Sure.
Um, and I also became interested then on I became interested in the notion of racism in this war, because I was finding it difficult to extricate racism and anti-Semitism. And
Mm.
so I had to do a little bit of reading and understanding about that,
Hmm.
to see how they are different, because um, it, it became very messy for me, because if it felt the same, it felt like
Right.
if people are condemning
Having
the Jewish people, how is that
is that
different?
not racial? Yeah. How's that different? Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and and that became very difficult for me, as because it's like, oh, hold on a second, here's a whole aspect that of the spectrum I can't get a grip on.
Hmm.
Um, but it the difference turned out to be between a nation rather than a people,
Hmm.
and and that's where it became very different, uh, and that was really peculiar. That's where it became very peculiar for me,
Hmm.
because it was the Jewish nation, rather than
The Jewish.
defining characteristics of a people.
Sure.
And um, it's very easy to go around throwing sort of generalizations and so on. But I do, I do feel that that became very important for me to understand in the context of that war,
Hmm. Hmm.
and understanding the importance of also not just for the Jewish state, but also for the Palestinians, because you see, then I started, as you do often, you go down these wormholes and you get more and more information, and um,
Absolutely.
the Palestinians were very easy to just do, oh yeah, the Arabs, but it's a nation within a multi-million Arab community, and
Yes.
um, all it's just important. It's important that that everything is respected, and that's, I think, what I learned. What I learned mostly from that was the first of all, never too old to reassess my own boundaries, my own understandings,
Sure.
um,
Sure.
because despite the fact that I feel I have a huge understanding and knowledge of this,
Hmm.
there's still more that I can learn, still more that I need to appreciate. Um, and also in terms of these the cases you've brought up about the US being founded a few hundred years ago by whites in the interest of themselves, maintaining power.
Hmm.
These wars today, um, whether not saying it's by whites necessarily. All I'm saying is it's war, power and control are
Yes.
at the root of all of it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the differences between peoples or possibly nations are the little superficial factors that are being moved around to work in the interest of people to just create the division and set one against another. And that's where it's most painful. But and when you look at it, it's so easy for them to play with, for the powers to play with that,
Hmm.
and it's heartbreaking.
Well, I'm gonna. Yes, you nailed that. It's called conquer and divide. However that works, right? Do you? A lot of research that I've done, a lot of modern day conflicts, a lot of modern day division goes all the way back to um, colonization and
Mm,
colonialism, unfortunately. And however you were successful in dividing and conquering? Was it religion? Was it a new type of product for trade? Was it financial? Was it militaristic weapons? You used whatever, or not you, but it, they used whatever worked to divide, making people feel like the haves and have nots. Once you divide, then you conquer that region, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we
Yeah.
see it cyclically today. Um,
Yeah.
the one thing I want to say before we go to break is this is also what makes it difficult to find and fact check so many things that um, I read and dive into, is that history is told from the viewpoint of the winner.
Always. Yes.
From the winner. So depending on who's been winning at history so far, that's why I said that a lot of our modern day conflicts harken back to colonialism and colonization, because they were the winners. And so history is told from that point of view. But as
Mm-hmm.
we hopefully are starting to see, there is a deeper global history. So
Mm.
that's also something that I like Move the Needle to point out, the real history of things. There's something that I'm fact checking, and I know I said I was going to say that and go to break. I got to add this before we go to break. There's something that I'm fact checking that, if true, is blowing my mind. There's uh, um, something that showed potential of cross Atlantic trade between the three Western African kingdoms and Mexico between the years of 900 AD and 1500 AD. So all of that was before the slave trade started taking place.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been able to fully fact check that yet, but I'm working on it. So that'll be another episode, and I look forward to bringing that, because that's a big deal. If you have people across different continents and crossing the Atlantic Ocean back and forth for equitable trade,
Mm-hmm.
equitable trade, not conquering, not, oh, hey,
Yeah.
here's a new land that someone lives on that I'm going to claim for myself. That's a big deal that needs to be brought to the light. So,
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's like that wonderful book. I don't know if you've read the book, The History of Cod. It's a phenomenal story.
yes,
You know,
yes.
the fact that the Vikings were there fishing for cod of northeastern seaboard way
Mhm.
before anyone even knew it existed.
Absolutely. That's what, so that's history. That's total history,
Oh
not
yeah.
just from a point of view.
And
But,
on a
oh,
similar
yes.
in a similar vein, just last week I was actually I was reading up about slavery, and
Hmm.
and um, and I kept on going a little bit further back in time,
Hmm.
and of course slavery exists today. Slavery has always existed.
Hmm.
However, I think what really shocked me was I had no real grasp of the scale of slavery
Hmm.
before what we commonly term as the slave trade, which is where we think about the the slave galleons traveling across to the Caribbean
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
creating the triangle between Europe, Caribbean, and Africa.
And yeah,
But
yep.
then uh, I was reading, and going back sort of earlier and earlier and earlier. So going back then into the Caliphate, the North African Caliphate, which obviously extended into
Hmm.
Spain for a minute, for a long period,
Hmm.
and the fact that they were the power during that time, and they would do raids, and they would take slaves from the European basin. So it's essentially Greece, Italy, even as far up as Ukraine and the islands in the Baltic, and they would bring them and they would become slaves for them. And this, you can go back and go back and go back, and you can go back right. You can trace this right back to the Dark Ages after the Roman Empire sort of imploded, and slavery was rife. Um,
It's
uh,
not just the transatlantic slave trade that we think. Yeah,
but that
exactly.
was the incredible thing, and it's it was against nations, nations taking other nationals as
Yes.
slaves. There were some times when slaves, for example, certainly when it was the caliphate, they were looking for, if they were prizing white females because they seemed exotic, so they would be forced
Right.
into sort of concubines, etc., and harems.
Mm-hmm.
But so there were physical features defining peoples, but they were also taking people from our other nations to become slaves. And slavery, unfortunately, seems to be an inevitable part of humanity,
And
which is
a part of the conquering part.
absolutely,
That's
yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
how do we overcome that? I mean, apart from education and just
Sure.
uh, it's pretty deep. It
It's
seems like
deep
it's a
seated
very
in civilization. It's
yeah,
well,
exactly.
what we can do, we're going to take a break. We'll take a break, and what we'll do is we will come back to talk about where we are with the good things, and hopefully we might be able to uncover what we can do, like you said, education, but not repeating some awful things about humanity. So,
Yeah.
folks, stay there. We're taking a quick break. We'll come back with the good stuff. Hang tight. Hey, folks, welcome back from the break. I know you had a lot to digest in that first segment. We went through, and yes, I'll use quotes, the bad and the ugly of where we are from 2020 to 2024. But don't worry, because we're also going to go through the good. All right. We don't want everyone to feel like, the sky is falling. It's not falling. It's cyclical. There are things that happen, and it's move the needles here to try to make you aware of these things, as well as having the conversations about um, how it affects people and how it affects us. But now, Jay, let's go ahead and jump into the good, shall we? Let's do that.
Absolutely. Yes.
So before I actually go into the rest of the slides, I want to say that sports and entertainment, they kind of get things right. Um, and we don't see it, but that kind of leads our society into things of diversity. Would you agree with that statement? Like sports and entertainment kind of lead the charge sometimes with showing diversity when it's not there.
I they I think
I stumped you.
clearly in terms of popular culture, I mean, yeah, they've got huge influence and sway. I mean, popular
Mhm,
culture, whether you're singers or like sports stars,
mhm,
comedians, actors, etc. They have got a very important influence and sway over popular opinion.
mhm,
And in terms, in those terms, it is important that that's used as a platform for spreading the correct message. Absolutely. Uh, on a more cynical note, it's I mean, I have there's money behind it, and as much as I would like to believe that it's
sure.
not powered by money, and it is just powered by the will to have the right moral position and do the right thing. That's a
Well, that we could discuss that on another episode. The difference between the reasons
yeah.
behind the influence, but I agree with you on that. That there is not always the right motive behind the message. But in this
But they are
instance,
usually the first, and they're usually in there before anybody else. That's true.
true. Yeah,
Absolutely.
when the before the money gets there, the motive tends to be from a truer perspective, and then the money's like, oh, we can capitalize on that. But
Yeah,
that's another show.
yeah, color washing the money. Yes, but
So
it's true. It's true. I mean, there have been multiple examples. Multiple examples. Sport, notably,
mhm,
one of the most important. Um, I know that you've got that wonderful example of the baseball league, the Black Baseball League. Yeah.
absolutely. So we'll jump into that one right now. Um, so Major League Baseball this year. Well, I don't want to say that they started it this year, but they had discussions about how to incorporate the statistics from the Negro Leagues into all of baseball statistics. Now, I think that is the absolute right thing to do. By the way, the Negro Leagues existed between the years of call it 1920 and 1948. Okay, before the integration began with baseball. Um, but this was the absolute right thing to do because they're all baseball players. Okay, it's and why have all of these separated statistics? Obviously, they were separated because um, at that time legally was racial separation, so they could not play in the major leagues. But now, starting these discussions in 2022 and actually incorporating the statistics in 2024, I believe that was the right thing to do for baseball. Um, Real quick before I go to the next slide, what I was reading in this article was they wanted to do it in a way that was fair to the game, meaning they wanted to go back through and find like the box score, or it wasn't just from like people's accounts of, well, yeah, well, this player did this player did that. They wanted to do it in an actual fair and statistical way. So there are still some statistics that may never be included because they can't be checked. They can't be fact checked against like a box score. But I
That's fair.
think this was the absolute right thing to do. Um, so baseball is not known for leading the charge in certain things, but they got it right here. You know, um, and still sticking with Major League Baseball, they even played a game this season at one of the oldest fields known. It's called Rickwood Field, and Rickwood Field was the home of the Birmingham Black Barons, which was a very popular team in the Negro Leagues as well. This particular game also had the first all-black umpire crew for baseball. So I mentioned that because, and I made a post of this on my personal Facebook page, but baseball's been around since about 1903. And so that's taken roughly 120 years to get the first all-black umpire crew. While that's a good thing, it shouldn't have taken 120 plus years, you know? But again, baseball kind of recognizing, excuse me, getting it correct. And by correct, I mean inclusive, not exclusive. Okay. Before we go on, any thoughts did you have about what Major League Baseball has done in the States?
I like the fact that they've done that. I'm obviously completely in favor, and I think that's really, really an important inclusion and recognition. I don't actually know until what year members of different ethnic communities within the US were sort of allowed even to enter the game on an official level.
Sure. Yeah,
it sounds difficult to me to comprehend that wasn't the case from the very beginning. It's again, as I've said to you before, coming from outside the US is
absolutely
selling itself so well as this land of opportunity, and everyone's here. You come in, you get on the working wagon, and everything's fine. You just got to make a life for yourself. And actually, it's all just a great marketing plan. But the it's just sad. Important to know, sad to discover, but great to see that people are owning up to mistakes and rectifying those things. You know,
I really do love hearing your perspective too,
right?
Yeah, and I love hearing your perspective too. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you speaking, but because you're not from here, some of these things, again, like you see a certain view from the outside. It's but now we're kind of like the Wizard of Oz, where we're pulling the curtain back and you're finding the wizard is not this great big voice. It's like just a regular guy who doesn't have magic. And but yeah, that's it. It's important to know because and again, it's not just here in the US, but it's like total history of things. And so if you want a full picture, you got to have inclusive history, not just one portion. I want to say this too about baseball. So there were several articles also where, and when you're doing inclusive things or rectifying mistakes, not everyone's going to be happy about it. Not everyone's going to be happy. So with this inclusion of statistics, some of the longtime greats who were, white, their position in the standing of where they were in baseball history changed. Whether it was, batting average or home runs or hits, those kind of things, their positions changed based on the inclusion of the statistics from now the black players. Now, there was an article, I don't think I put it on a slide, but also the media has a certain responsibility with things as well. So the one article that I read, the headline said something like, I forget the player's name, but the player was stricken from the record or something like that, right? That's what the headline said. So that's almost like clickbait, or that's like the player or the player's family was upset that their status changed in the statistics of baseball. The further I read, the player wasn't stricken from the record or stripped, I think is what the headline said. What the truth was that their position changed based on inclusion of the statistics. But there was nothing in the article that would have made it seem like a negative thing. But if you stuck with that headline, oh, certain players stripped of record, like you
Yeah.
would, it makes you feel a certain way
Dangerous
about that.
language. Yeah, leading
Hmm.
people to the wrong conclusions. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. And so
especially
again, if you read that headline and you don't read the article, you're
yes,
going to feel like, oh my gosh, the inclusion of these statistics stripped a player of their record after
yeah.
120 some years. That would feel wrong
Yes.
from the headline. From the headline
From the,
only, it would
it would
feel wrong.
even if it well would it be wrong, right, or it's incendiary language, and that's the problem. And so they do actually have a responsibility to say to to to, to say things a little more how they are,
Yeah,
rather than just selling the scandal always. Um, that is true.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's um it's an interesting point. I'm literally just trying to work out how I would feel about some of the sports greats or
Sure.
uh, literary greats being stripped of their
Yeah.
records. I
Yeah.
I also I mean at the end of the day, these people they've lived their glory, and they had it didn't actually affect how popular they were in their day. It didn't affect any of that.
Right.
Uh, Not at all. I,
It
I,
just kind
I
of
don't really.
changes history a little bit, but I think in the end it's good to include all of the history, you know? Like you said, I don't it didn't change their standing while they were playing
Yeah.
or even in retirement, in the Hall of Fame, or it doesn't change their being a Hall of Famer player, you know?
But I also do believe that within this, it's important to help people recognize the fact that there has been this rectification, not to sort of slide it in quietly as if it's never really happened and it's always been like
Correct.
that. Because I
Yeah.
think the problem is that if you actually do that, then you're not only you taking away the monumental importance of getting them recognized, getting
Hmm.
that league recognized, but the historical facts that were in place before that they weren't, and that people were playing separately.
Sure.
Um, Not to make it into a bigger thing than it needs to be, but just so that people understand the reality of history and what's brought
Mhm.
us to the present day. That we're not avoiding the uncomfortable past.
That part. Yes, we can't avoid like it happened, and it happened a certain way. And yes,
Mm.
they were segregated. They couldn't play until integration started. But yeah, it's okay to acknowledge that that happened. And by baseball actually incorporating the statistics, playing at Rickwood Field, which was one of the home stadiums of a Negro League team, I think that is. Also, I meant to say this during that game. Some of the players that were still alive playing in the Negro Leagues, they brought them onto the field and like recognized them for their
Mm.
accomplishments when they played.
That's
So
great.
that's a great thing to acknowledge it so that you can now move forward in a more inclusive way. You know, that's the goal of rectifying those things. So
Absolutely.
we were talking about entertainment as well.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know who Percy Miller is, Jay and I were big Master P fan. I'm kidding. I don't know if Jay was a big Master P fan, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that was his rap name. He was a rapper, entertainer, but he launched Miller Family Foods, and that was on June 19th of this year, 2024, and that's significant because that's the recognized now holiday for Juneteenth, which was the celebration of the end of slavery. Um, so this the I almost said Master P. Jay Percy Miller um, launched Miller Family Foods. because they wants to offer the alternatives for like breakfast foods, but it's for people in areas that have food insecurity, and also using high quality natural ingredients that will be making these foods. So I think that's a significant thing to point out. Um, Again, we've been talking a lot about the racial inequality of things, but there's socioeconomic inequality in inequity as well, which areas have food insecurity. You don't have access to quality produce, quality fruits and vegetables, or even a grocery store that's close enough. Let's put aside quality food. If you have one grocery store for a several block radius, and yet you have um, a higher economic area that has three or four grocery stores in that same type of 2 3 block radius, number one, you get more choice. And so by having more choice, it also provides a bit of price competition for each of those stores to provide the best price for what they're offering. But if you have one store, that's it. And that one store may only get X amount of products. So that creates this food insecurity. And we're not even talking about quality of food yet, you know? They've also been called food deserts, if you will, where you just don't have access to foods. Um, I want to add this before you joined as co-host for this time. I had done an episode before where um, certain there's I forget the name of the people, and I'd have to go back and look through the past episodes, but they were actually putting up refrigerators in different neighborhoods in New York City. I believe it may have been Brooklyn or the Bronx. I don't remember, but they would have volunteers stock these refrigerators with actual produce. So you know how certain stores may get rid of the produce and it's a couple days old, but it's still viable to eat. So in these food deserts, or in these neighborhoods that had food deserts, they were putting up refrigerators and had volunteers stocking the refrigerators with quality
Mm-hmm.
food. So
Okay.
there are also people trying to combat food insecurity and food deserts, just like I pointed out with Percy Miller. So
Very good. Very
yeah,
nice.
absolutely.
I think which all of these things are really good, are really great plasters. But like
Mhm.
I say plasters. What do you say? Band-aids. That's you give them band-aids.
we,
Yes,
we, we'll get through our language barrier. No, I understood what you
exactly. Um, and they're they serve an wonderfully valid purpose, and
mean.
that's
Mhm.
terrific. Nonetheless, you still need to go down through the layers and get to the real causes and get under there and solve it from the bottom, because there's all these people that have got great hearts, uh, fabulous communities set up, and actually are really providing wonderful support systems, like the
I know, I
master
know. I did the same thing.
um, they're there, they're
Yeah,
doing it, and it's wonderful. But it's kind of sad that they have to be there at all. I mean,
right.
the
Or
fact
that
that
they can't be
it's 5 hours.
complementary to a system that's
Mm,
providing it.
exactly.
And I think that's what you were getting at, and this is part of why Move the Needle exists, right? We're
Hmm.
pointing out
Hmm.
that there are some systemic flaws that don't serve the people
Yes,
well. There are some systemic flaws.
all right. And these systemic flaws show themselves far too readily all the time, as we know, in areas of high black populations, ethnic minorities, etc., etc., etc.
Absolutely.
And this is
Mhm.
where this is where we're trying to get to the bottom of it, and we need to try to find out what's going on, what what is changing, what needs to be changed.
Sure. Well, and so you mentioned, or we mentioned the whole systemic issues, right? Well, here's one that actually goes. This is in Denver. This was called the Denver Basic Income Project. This is also from, I think it started in 2022, but these were the
Mhm.
highlights of this program where it helped participants secure housing and full time jobs. It was a pilot program that provided direct cash payments. So it was to over 800 Coloradans. Okay. And there's a few statistics there that show some of the results from this. Um, I think this is kind of what we're talking about, though. This seems like a program that was trying to get to the root of fixing a systemic problem. When you're talking about homelessness or you're talking about uh, unemployment, right? Those
Yeah,
can be um, variables, or not even variables, but those can be results from something that is systemic. So
yeah.
it started in 2022, and it
Very
again
interesting as
focused.
well to see there's a big saving there on behalf of the
Yeah,
state, which is important. I
it,
mean, by
absolutely.
just
Yeah, this.
levering people out of those very, very dangerous cycles where they can't
Yes.
quite get themselves out. You
Hmm.
just give them a little bit of support, and the majority of people, once they can be up and running, they will take it, and they have got the capacity and the wherewithal to make it happen themselves. And
Yes.
it's win for the state. So you get a win-win situation there.
That's why I'm highlighting this, because that was
Mhm.
the most important part of this. I have more slides to show, but this was no strings attached. The payments that they gave the participants in this program were no strings attached. And again, you're talking about people who were homeless, living in cars, temporary shelters. Um, that's who they were targeting, right? So on June 18th, they released their that was 2023 year report, and it also showed that 45% of the participants had secured housing or an apartment from receiving this basic income over 10 months. And this, look at this too. They experienced fewer emergency room visits, spent less nights in the hospital or a temporary shelter, and less time in jail. That's huge. That's huge because these are not necessarily the public services that are supposed to serve folks
Mm.
who are homeless. If you have an emergency room visit, it's hopefully because there's an injury that needs immediate attention, not necessarily because you're out in the cold and being frozen, which is also bad, but that might not be an emergency visit compared to something else, or being in jail.
Well,
That's
I mean, simple fact that if you're living on the streets, there is obviously a higher risk of you becoming
Mhm.
injured or experiencing some
Absolutely,
sort of accident than if you're living in the
absolutely,
safety of your own home. Um,
absolutely. And
so
so you
that's
can,
good news.
oh, sorry, yeah, you can find out more about the Basic Income Project here. This is the article that I read about that. Um, but seeing that savings, um, that was just within a 10-month time span. That was almost over $500,000 that it saved the city of Denver from trying to, again, policing homeless people, emergency room visits, all those things. Because if you're going to the emergency room and you're homeless, I'm probably sure you don't have insurance. So, who's paying for that visit? Who's paying for what happens? All of those things. The basic income was somewhere between a $1,000, and I think some of the payments were as low as 500. So once you were in this program, they kind of determined what tier you received. But that is another great way of trying to level the playing field, trying to provide equity first before you can get to equality. You know. Um,
Absolutely.
something that recently just happened, and this is kind of an ongoing thing, but there were general elections in France, and there was a surprise coalition of the liberals of the left party that actually defeated the far right extreme conservative party that was expected to win. Jay, can you, if you would like to shed any more light on this? I know this is like an ongoing thing because this is all fresh, but
It is very, very fresh indeed. Yes, it's complicated, messy,
yeah.
but politics usually should be. the, the they did manage to the French population took a strong swerve to the left on the second round, the second and final round of the voting in the election process in France.
Mm-hmm.
First round showed a very strong favor towards the right, which was a strong indication of really the fears and the concerns of the French population.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting that this swerve to the left happened on the second and final round, because it was almost like they were saying that they were showing what they're afraid of and what their principal concerns are in the regular person's day-to-day existence. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe they didn't want a far right government in power. So
Sure.
that's why in the real and final vote, they swerved more to the left and went with what is in France a much more traditional the traditional political power structure.
Mm-hmm.
The 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 left that they have voted in is a bit of a ragtag bunch of parties all thrown in there together in an attempt to take the power away from the right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure that this left wing party is going to be able to sort themselves out sufficiently to enact any policy of any worth.
I was
I
going
mean,
to say the same thing. Yeah, I'm not sure how sustainable the coalition is going to be, but
no,
I use it to point it out that there's hope if you feel it as a community, as a nation, as people, like, and you pointed it out. You know, there was a fear of what could happen, of what was coming, and so they came together to say, no, we don't want what the far right is going to provide. We
yeah,
might not have the answer currently, but we don't want a governing body that's all the way over on one extreme.
yeah. I
So,
mean, of course, the the problem I think with what we're currently experiencing in terms of, well, I'll try and say this in a nutshell form.
sure.
Traditional politics is getting rather lost in the modern world. The political philosophy is always very good, but sticking dogmatically to one philosophy or another is nowadays creating too many problems, because the issues are common to all, and not one single philosophy is going to be able to find the solution.
Very true.
Not that that's ever going to be entirely possible anyway. Nonetheless,
Mm-hmm.
the left wing in France needs to actually be listening to the fears of those people who were pushing in that right direction initially to raise those concerns. And if the left actually want to be able to allay those fears within the French society, they would be foolish not to pay attention to that risk, that threat that was posed after the first round.
Very true.
And you just because you've averted the that right wing power coming into to the government, it doesn't mean it's gone away, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention or even necessarily work with them to find solutions.
Correct.
Because that comment you said about the prominent activist, um, I can't remember what about push them away, but bringing them back.
Yeah, the former Congress or the late Congressman John Lewis. Yes, yes,
Mhm.
where you call people out and call out the inequities and the inequalities, but then you call them in.
Exactly.
Call them out and you call them
Exactly.
in. Yes. And
And
I agree with you. I think you're right. They will make a mistake. Like that's great to come together and avoid the far right extreme power that was possible to take or potentially going to take place in France.
yeah,
But the mistake would be now that you've kind of averted the power takeover, you cannot rest because now there are still real concerns and fears that need to be addressed. And how do you address those in the best possible way? That's
exactly.
the next
Yeah,
step, you know.
yeah.
Before we end, I want to play a clip, and this is kind of it's about it also kind of pertains to what we just talked about with France, but it's more about the US and kind of what we're going through right now. And then I'll get your final thoughts. So let me
Hmm.
play this clip. Hold on.
In behavioral psychology called extinction burst. It is basically when a maladaptive behavior is being conditioned out. And so the person doubles down on the maladaptive behavior because somewhere in the subconscious, they know that it's dying. And so things get worse before they get better. And so if we apply that to the empire and what we are witnessing, for example, the presidential debate, and the draconian laws that are being passed, this is empire's grip on its extinction, basically. US hegemony and empire is falling. It's inevitable. It has been researched and studied by historians that every empire falls every 250 years. That is the exact Pluto cycle that the United States is in, which is 250 years. In 2026, the US will be 250 years old. And if you've been paying attention, all of these laws that they're passing basically to censor and control us should not be a shock to you. This has been imagined, intended, and designed by the original settlers of the US. What I'm saying is things are going to get a lot worse before they get better, not in a way of fear mongering, but if we understand that a hurricane is coming, then we know that we need to prepare for it, which is why individually and collectively, we all feel this sense of urgency that we need to figure out, first of all, who we are. We have to know ourselves if we are going to know our purpose. And then we have to start doing our role in collective liberation. So we need to ask ourselves, if we know that essentially this is the beginning of the end of empire, what are we all co-creating when it falls? And we really need to start working with each other because they will not save us. We will save us.
So that is, I'm not sure if she's an actual um, psychologist, but that her name is Laura Chung. And I like what she said. Now, there was a lot in that clip. Um, so, yes, she said it gets worse before it gets better. But if we know that something is coming, how do we prepare for that? So, how do you prepare for it? And then the other part, how do you then work together so that coming out of this dark time, coming out of this bad period, the hurricane, if you will, you work together and what do you see moving forward? That's the part that I like about what she said. Sometimes these things are cyclical, they're inevitable, but the part that you get to control is the inclusivity and working together to form something new and different after the dark period passes. Um, so what if any final thoughts do you have for where we are from 2020 or where we are now in 2024 from 2020, or even thoughts about that clip that I played?
Right. I would say that we are clearly in the midst of huge upheaval and change across, not just across the US and Europe, but all around the place. And it's not it's not a bad thing. I think that uh, it is cyclical. I'm not referring to the cycles which the woman in the clip referred to,
Yeah,
because
not the empire cycles of 250 years. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure. I don't really agree with that. Um, but I also have my doubts, as really, if I'm honest, about whether or not the US is in the beginning of its total decadence. Of course, it's on a bit of a dip. It's on a bit of a downer. But
Sure.
I also think that being part of a human society, although we try to control things and we try to make everything into a right angle, we're fundamentally just messy animals, and everything's pretty organic. So I don't. I think everything can have different lifespans, different directions, and we're not an algorithm. At the end of the day, we're
I,
a lot messier than an algorithm.
I like that.
And
We're not an algorithm.
you know, I think it's I do, but I do believe we're in a moment of change, and this
Mhm.
change is messy. And yeah, we've had some pretty horrific things happen,
Sure.
but I see in the US, as I see here in Europe, as in here in Spain,
Mhm.
there's a lot of facing up to what we've done wrong. Here in Spain, there's a lot of facing up to corruption. There's been a lot of acknowledgement of corruption. There's been a lot of acknowledgement of
Mhm.
domestic abuse and violence in the home. And there's been a lot of acceptance of, for example, of what was traditionally a very sexist society. And a huge amount of work has been done of late to repair that.
Good.
And yeah, it's been painful, but that's okay. It's more important that there's a painful recognition and moving forward than
Mm.
just pretending everything is okay. The same thing there for the US. Uh,
Absolutely.
things are not comfortable, but like the woman in the video said, uh, preparing yourself, getting the right tools to deal with it,
Mhm.
and actually learning, paying attention to our environment, paying attention to each other, and having the right mindset and mentality puts us in the best stead to actually deal with that change and take the right route out of this change so that we can live in a better, more equitable society.
And I have nothing to add after that. Great mic drop thought. I love it. But you're exactly right. That's yeah, being able to understand who you are, what part you want to play in the
Mm,
roles moving forward, working together. That's how and it's okay for it to be messy. It's going to be messy when you
mhm,
have to acknowledge hundreds and thousands of years of mistakes. It's
yeah,
not going to be fun or easy, but
mhm,
if you don't acknowledge those, you're doomed to repeat them. So being
yeah,
able to acknowledge them,
yeah,
understand, okay, that did happen, but being
mm.
able to then choose a different course of moving forward.
And
Yeah.
recognizing that we all have a responsibility. That I think today it's very easy for us to just assume they'll take care of it, or expect the whichever
Yeah.
institution, whichever authority to deal with it, and hopefully they'll make everything all right for the rest of us.
Right.
You know,
Nope.
but
We all have a
like
responsibility. Yeah.
all those, we should have hopefully grown up with those sayings like charity starts at home, or Mahatma Gandhi would be the change you want to see in the world.
Yes.
If we
Yes.
can actually, each of us, not be afraid to take responsibility for our own selves in our own world communities, and actually just make those little changes. If everyone's there, if everyone's contributing, it's enough. It's enough. And if we can actually do that without being aggressive, without believing we have
Mhm.
to push it, push everything on top of other people,
Yeah.
we can make a better place, right? Hopefully.
I agree with you. This is why you are the new co-host of Move the Needle, because we agree with that 100%. Yeah. Well, we
It's
have appreciated you all listening to this latest episode, and we
have
welcome Jay into the Move the Needle hosting family. But hey, guys, don't forget, if you want to get the new content, you got to subscribe and also hit the notifications button so you get when new content comes. We will be posting the YouTube channel, and we will see you all on the next episode of Move the Needle. Till next
Absolutely.
time.
Bye bye.